Well, hi, everybody, and welcome into this week's edition of our ShawLocal.com Bears Insider podcast. We are missing one of the three amigos today. I am Hub Arkush, and our ShawLocal.com Bears Insider beat reporter Sean Hammond is with us. Kyle Neighbors. I don't know if there's a Kyle Hammond. If there is, I don't even know if Sean knows about him. But Kyle Neighbors, who of course is our group sports editor at Shaw Media, needed to have the day off today, but he will be back with us when we return next time with our podcast. Sean and I are looking forward to visiting with you for the next, 35 to 45 minutes. We've got some interesting Bears topics and NFL topics to get into with you. Just want to give you a note on the front end. We are going to be taking a slight summer hiatus after this week. We're going to take 2 weeks off. So we will be back roughly 3 weeks from today. If you are actually joining us live via Twitter or YouTube, it'll be 3 weeks from today. Otherwise, you'll be able to hear the podcast again in 3 weeks after this week's edition. We do want to, again, thank our great sponsors, Heinz Lumber, 11 Chicagoland locations. Any of your building needs, if you're thinking about an addition, just doing some home improvement, or even building a new house, contractors, make sure you find the Heinz Lumber location nearest you. And so it is you and I today, Sean, and I think we start with the veteran minicamp now in the books. We were both out there all last week, or 3 days last week that the mini camp lasted. The Bears, unlike they often do, did not cancel the third day. They did go ahead and work, and I suspect that was a bow to the combination of not one but two new quarterbacks in Andy Dalton and Justin Fields, and the fact that there were no defensive veterans at the voluntary OTAs the couple weeks before.
Yeah, it's hard to get any work in when you don't have your starters, and I think that had to be part of the reason why they went the full time. And I guess it's good to take advantage of any practice time that you can, because you don't get a whole lot of that in the off season, and especially when you got guys skipping OTAs. So it was good to get back out there for us to see these guys, and especially after not having any off season program last year. We get a little bit better read on things heading into training camp, but we're excited to get going here in a couple weeks.
Yeah, let me remind anybody who is actually joining us live via YouTube or Twitter, if you have questions, you want to join the conversation, thoughts you want to share, just go ahead, use the chat function, get them in there, and Sean will get your question up, and we'll see if we can help you with an answer, or at least give you some opinion and some conversation about it. Sean, it's funny, you go to these mini camps and the OTAs and everything, and you can only see so much. It's practicing football, but it's not really football. Nobody has pads on. There is no contact whatsoever. Even what they call on air, running routes against offense, against defense, the coverage isn't what you would normally expect in a regular football situation. But everybody out there is still doing the same things. And so with that as kind of the criteria, there are guys who occasionally stick out at minicamp, at OTAs. And this year, I think was no exception for the Bears. As I just mentioned, 16 of the top 17 guys on the defensive depth chart weren't at OTAs. They were all at minicamp, and so just getting a chance to see them was intriguing. But beyond that, the fact that they obviously did not stick out during the OTAs over the last couple of weeks that we've watched, I know there's some guys that have caught my eye. Let me let you go first, though. Who are a couple of the guys that you were either pleasantly surprised or mildly disappointed with?
Yeah, so the guys who stood out to me through this offseason program, we talked about the first one a lot last week, or at least a little bit. Kindle Vildor in the secondary, he had at least one really nice day, and generally looked good every day. And he's a guy who's going to be in the mix there in the secondary, and we'll see just how involved he is come training camp. You got to throw Justin Fields into the mix too. I mean, his arm was impressive. It's hard to, we don't get the full grasp of where he's at with the offense, but we can certainly see the athletic ability and that arm ability too. And then another guy too, I got to mention Darnell Mooney. I thought he looked really good as well, especially in OTAs when Allen Robinson wasn't there. Mooney was certainly stepping up into that number one role.
Yeah, and let me add right there to it, Sean, Allen Robinson, because yes, you expect it from him. He's your number one receiver. He's one of the best players on the team. And yet with all of the offseason controversy, as far as he was concerned, never a question that he would show up, because I would say not just a lot, but maybe in the majority of guys in his situation don't show up for these mini camps, even though they're mandatory. Obviously, with an $18 million franchise tag hung on him, he could afford the $90,000 in fines if he wasn't there. But not only did he show up, but the minute he steps on the field, you see once again that he is the best offensive player on the football team. So I did think he really stuck out. I agree with you on everybody you mentioned. I would add to Kindle Vildor, who looked very good, Jalen Johnson. And while we do expect it from him, he is supposed to be the young up-and-comer and the heir apparent to the Kyle Fuller mantle. With the shoulder injuries, with missing the last 3 weeks in the playoff game last year, not knowing at this point, having had several shoulder surgeries in his past in college, what to expect. He seemed to be right where he was at the time that he suffered the shoulder injury late last season, and was very impressive along with Vildor in coverage. Another guy who stuck out to me, and it's interesting because until you see the big uglies, the offensive and defensive linemen get the pads on and start banging heads, that's the main part of their job. But you still look for the athleticism, the comfort level, even just the natural feel for what they're doing. And with all eyes on Tevin Jenkins, I thought Jenkins looked fine. He didn't do anything that concerned me. He didn't necessarily stick out other than with a good work ethic, and I think that'll be fine. But the guy who did really stick out to me was Larry Borum, the other tackle, who they drafted in the 5th round. He completely changed his body since the end of his last season at Missouri. We had known that, but until you see him on the football field and then see his feet, the athleticism, I didn't expect that. Everything that I have heard about him is that he could very well be a 8-10 year starter in the NFL at right tackle, but right tackles tend to get kind of cornered or painted with a certain set of expectations that shows them as being limited. I didn't see that in him. I mean, he looked to me like his feet were as good as Jenkins. And so right now they've got him working on the right side. That is almost certainly where he is going to work to earn playing time. But just very impressed with the athlete that he was. Another guy who impressed me was Sam Mustipher. Listen, I have an issue. I believe that James Daniels is potentially one of the best centers in the NFL, a perennial Pro Bowler. He can be very good at guard. He does not have the natural ability, body type instincts for guard that he does for center. His ceiling is higher at center. And I get all these goofballs on social media who want to claim that he failed in his audition there. That couldn't be further from the truth. He was a youngster playing the position. There were some issues with making the calls. He had guys who'd never played offensive line alongside him and Rashad Coward. They made some changes because he wasn't ready yet. You got to realize he's still only 23 years old now in his 4th year in the NFL. And so looking at the ceiling, I have wondered, is it wise to leave him at guard and play Mustipher at center? Sam Mustipher played very well last year and could, again, be another guy who starts 7, 8, 9 years in the league. But you don't feel the star power there. But then watching him and visiting with him, I think it was Wednesday of last week during the minicamp, I was very impressed with where he is right now. He's a really mature young man. And so even if he never becomes quite the center that Daniels could be, if he is very good at center and Daniels becomes a very good guard, Cody Whitehair has already been a Pro Bowl alternate, and then you've still got Alex Bars behind them, you're in pretty good shape there. But I just think he was worth mentioning. Damian Williams, another guy who stuck out to me only because I had my eye on him the whole time. And he does look to be what I thought he was going to be, a change of pace back and a strong number 2 to David Montgomery, who, by the way, again, we expect this. He had a big year last year, but he also, I thought, looked very good.
Yeah, it was funny when one of those days when we were talking to Coach Nagy, he said that Montgomery came up to him and is like disappointed because they don't get to do a whole lot of they don't run a whole lot of running plays. They don't do a whole lot of that in the off season because there is no contact and it's hard to get some of that stuff done. And a lot of this is focused on passing. And Montgomery was apparently a little bit bummed about that. But yeah, he looked good and he's looking as good as ever. And I want to go back to your point about Larry Borum. I thought that was really good point, Hub, because when you look at Larry Borum and Tevin Jenkins out there, they're wearing 75 and 76 on the jerseys, and they're almost the exact same size. It's like it's easy to get them mixed up if you don't read the number correctly because they seem to be on that same path, and they are both doing really good things at this point, and they're both learning the offense, and it seems like they're always next to each other. I saw them working they were working together in some of those one-on-one situations, and that's a good thing to have your two rookie linemen on the same page.
Yeah, and there's other guys, who looked good out there. Cole Kmet certainly looks like he's been working hard in the offseason and maybe ready to take the next step. I come back over the defense. It's pretty obvious how excited Tayshaun Gibson is to be back with the Bears when that was uncertain. Hard to say with Eddie Jackson. Again, that's a classic example of until we see some real football or at least some padded practices, won't know as much about that. But there were, and then one other guy I got to mention because I'll never understand it. Riley Ridley flashed for me a few times out there. He always does when he gets to play football. For whatever reason, he has not been able to earn jerseys on Sunday. He hasn't been able to crack that depth chart. I'm not saying he's a number 1 or even a number 2 receiver in the NFL, but I do struggle to understand why he doesn't seem to be allowed into the mix for those 3, 4, and 5 jobs. And he made some plays that he also had a bad drop. There was one, I think it was on Wednesday, which I suppose is part of the frustration. But you don't see a lot of that in practice, or at least the part that we get to see. And I'm sure there's a few other guys as we talk that I'll remember, did some things that I kind of liked or thought were impressive. But we do have to mention there were a couple things that were a little disappointing. Robert Quinn, who, last year he didn't play as badly as people painted as. He didn't get the sacks. And that's what he got the $30 million guaranteed for, was to be a double-digit sack guy. And so I'm not suggesting that he wasn't disappointing last year. He was, but he wasn't a total flop. It's not like they gave this guy all this money and he can't play or he's not going to make the team this year. And I think there is real cause to believe that he can bounce back and still have another 8, 10, 11 sack season, or even a couple in him. That's been his track record. He's been remarkably consistent over his 9 years in the league so far. I think it's 9 years in the league so far. But the fact that on day one of veteran minicamp in the middle of the summer, when you haven't played football for 5 or 6 months, he again has a nagging injury that keeps him off the field, which was kind of the story of his whole first year with the Bears. It's hard not to be a little bit concerned about that.
Yeah, it's hard not to go through that, oh, here we go again thought process, because we saw that last year in training camp and into the early part of the season, and here we are again seeing the same thing. And to a lesser extent, Anthony Miller wasn't able to participate much, but he was at least running around on his own and seems like he's going to be just fine. And then we don't need to harp on Eddie Goldman again, but I know we talked about him a lot in previous ones. But yeah, with Eddie Goldman gone and the Bears, or I should say Eddie Goldman, not present over the last couple of weeks, and the Bears come out and sign a defensive tackle, that's not a good sign. They seem to be at least thinking about a backup plan there.
Well, yeah, and Mike Pennell is a pretty good nose tackle. It's not like this guy is somebody else's perennial second stringer. He has been a starter with the Jets and with the Packers. And while I'm sure he is here in the hopes that he's going to be depth behind Eddie Goldman, there is no guarantee for that. And while we can't really beat up the same story, I do, during our podcast, try and encourage folks to go to shawlocal.com and read some of the stuff that's archived there, because I had a piece in depth somewhat on Eddie. And I think what is so troubling about it is that clearly the Bears know some things they're not telling us. And I understand, that there are times when that's the way you have to run a football team, but I don't see where this is one of those times. For Matt Nagy to tell us 2 weeks ago, I think, or 3 weeks ago, actually, at the beginning of the OTAs, even though we knew a lot of the veterans wouldn't be there, that Eddie Goldman had been in Lake Forest, that he had seen him, that he looked great, that he's working hard, that he's excited to be back. And then to come back 2 weeks later and have him not show up for a mandatory minicamp, which we asked Matt, and he did say this is not an excused absence, which means that they don't have to, but they can fine him up to $90,000 and some change. And it sounded to me like they're going to, and they should, because that's the whole point of all this. And then to say, but we're still optimistic and we think he's going to be ready to rock and roll in training camp. That's almost a direct quote from Matt. Well, that's 1 and 1, and it does not come out to 2. It's just that doesn't make any sense to me. That there's something going on with Eddie Goldman, and there's no question in my mind that the Bears know exactly what it is. And I think this is a case where they probably owe it to their fans to be a little more honest, because it's not like they're creating some competitive advantage or disadvantage by telling the truth about this. And now, there is always the one possibility. You say these things, then you find out that there was a serious personal family issue or something like that. And then I feel like a jerk, because I'm not trying to criticize the guy. I'd like to know what's going on. But even in that case, so just tell us there's a person. They say personal issues all the time. They did it with Roquan Smith his rookie year and never shared what the personal issues were, and they're personal, so they don't really have to. But that's good enough. But they didn't. They tried to make it look like they weren't really sure, but they're confident. And I just find it hard to believe that that's a fair telling of what's going on right now between Goldman and the team.
Yeah, that would have been an easy way to mask whatever's going on here, and you hope that there is nothing of that nature going on, nothing personal that then we're going to feel like real jerks here talking about this for 3 or 4 weeks or whatever. But it almost would have been better if Matt Nagy hadn't said that he met with Eddie Goldman a couple of weeks ago, because that seems to make it seem a little bit worse that you meet with him and then he doesn't show up a few weeks later. So I don't know what to make of this moving forward. I mean, I guess we're going to have to sit tight and see where he is come training camp.
Sean, what is so strange about it to me is that one of Matt Nagy's greatest strengths as a head coach is as a communicator. I mean, you've got a lot of fans and people who really don't know what they're talking about just because they're not in the locker room or close to the situation, who don't see how much these players love playing for Matt Nagy. I mean, the idea that he doesn't know what he's doing, or you can't call plays or anything like that. He's made some mistakes. There's no question. But where he is really strong is communicating with his players, and I think he does a really good job for the most part of communicating with us, with the media, which is basically his pipeline to his fan base. And he will sometimes go in depth with explanations and try and talk around things and try and make it sound not as bad or worse than it is. But he does it in such a way that you feel like he's being straight with you. And in this particular case, it was just intriguing to me that on one hand, they claimed, to not be terribly concerned and they think everything's going to be fine. But then on the other hand, it would have been the easiest thing in the world to say personal issue, and that would have been the end of it. Or beyond that, don't go out of your way to let us know it is unexcused. It was so vague that it was a side of Matt that I haven't seen before. And that's why I'm just concerned that they've got something here that they're even afraid that if they say the wrong thing, they're going to step in something.
Yeah, so then, Hub, I don't know if you want to change gears here a little bit too. I mean, the other big news, we obviously talked about Arlington Heights a lot last week on the show, and there was a little bit of news this week. The Bears announced they have a new deal with Bet Rivers and Rivers Casino. I know you wrote about this yesterday. What was the interesting little tidbit to come out of that?
Well, there's a couple things, Sean. And again, there's a little history involved here. And for some of our younger listeners and fans, they may not care. But for most of us, we can remember it was just a few years ago that the NFL was still going up to Capitol Hill, every chance they got to testify about the evils and dangers of legalizing gambling and how it could destroy the game. And then within minutes of the U.S. Supreme Court decision on Murphy versus the NCAA, where they ruled that legalized gambling is a state-by-state issue, the NFL couldn't embrace it quickly enough. And now all their biggest partners are online gambling sites and casinos. And so for the Bears to be making this deal, the heritage franchise in the NFL, my first reaction was I get it, and they should. It's revenue, and it makes sense, and it feels right. I mean, I don't, it's interesting, Sean. I don't know how you feel about this. I don't personally gamble only because I hate the losing so much more than the winning. I'm just such a bad loser that gambling is not a good idea for me. But I have nothing against it for people who enjoy it and who can control it. Obviously, I worry about people who get in too deep. And I didn't understand why it wasn't legalized 30, 40 years ago when all these federal and state budget crises started. And, instead of letting the mafia make all the money off it, legalize it, tax it, and try and straighten out some budgets. So that part of it is fine. But it just feels strange for the Bears to have a gambling casino as a title sponsor, an exclusive in the marketplace. That was my first reaction. Where it really got more interesting is I may be the only nerd out there who reads everything on the press releases, including when you get down to the bottom line and it has the quick boilerplate description of the parties involved. And I read the Bears, I know who they are. They're a professional football franchise. I know ownership, blah, blah. And then I got to Bet Rivers and Rivers Casino. And I knew that it was owned by Neil Bloom, who is one of the wealthiest men in Chicago, and is a former attorney. Well, not former, he's an attorney. And most importantly, he's made his billions as a real estate developer. And I knew that they had to have a partnership with a gambling company, and I suspected it could have been Churchill Downs. But what I did not know is that Churchill Downs is a 61% owner of Bet Rivers and Rivers Casino, and Churchill Downs are the people that the Bears are trying to buy Arlington Racecourse from. Now, the reason that I have believed that even if they bought the land, it didn't mean that they were going to get a new state-of-the-art sports palace is because the McCaskies have neither the personal wealth nor the know-how to develop a real estate project like that. Because you're talking about the ability with this 326-acre plot to do something like what Stan Kroenke just did in Los Angeles at SoFi, which is a $5.5 billion sports entertainment complex. And it's not only the newest, shiniest, brightest stadium in the NFL, it is office space, practice facilities, it is retail space, it's restaurants, it's bars, there's a place for a casino, there's a place for a hotel, and there's even some condo and apartment development. And that's what you would do with those 326 acres in Arlington Heights. The McCaskies can't do that, but Churchill Downs and Neil Bloom sure could. And so I just, it could be nothing more than this is a marketing partnership for their casinos. Again, we have no idea who the other bidders are with Churchill Downs right now on that property. But just to kind of close the loop on this, Neil Bloom is also a part owner of the Chicago White Sox and the Chicago Bulls. He's been a minority partner with Jerry Reinsdorf. So suddenly, in a week, the McCaskies have gone from no ability whatsoever to build their own stadium to suddenly having all the pieces in place if they wanted to get into a partnership with these folks. And it would create two options. One is if they do want to sell the team, I'm positive that Bloom would be somebody who'd at least kick the tires and have the ability to do it and put together a group and maintain his relationship with Churchill Downs for the casino portion of it, because I'm sure they'd put a casino out there. As a matter of fact, there was an off-track betting site right there on the property that was a Ditka's restaurant for a while. So I don't know if that was probably part of the racecourse license, but I believe the Bears were granted a license for Soldier Field. So I don't think there'd be any trick in getting that. The state would love it. It'd be new tax revenue for them. So they have the ability to either sell the team to a group headed by Bloom, or what would make even more sense is if some of the kids want out and some of the kids don't, is they sell a portion of the team and remain the majority shareholder or the largest shareholder in exchange for a portion of the new sports entertainment complex, which they then own and generate revenue from, but let Bloom and Churchill Downs be the ones who make all the money or risk losing money if the thing isn't profitable. But what fans need to understand is that if you build something like this, it's not just the ability to bring a Super Bowl here, because there is tremendous debate. We've seen these estimates that a Super Bowl can pump anywhere from $175 to $350 million into a local economy. There are some who believe it puts nothing in the local economy, that it brings revenue in, but it costs so much to do, and it's just churning dollars, and it doesn't have that big an impact. But what it absolutely does do is give you that venue year-round to bring more mega concerts, more convention business, more, you can do monster truck, you can do whatever you want, and then you're drawing everybody to what I'm sure would be a state-of-the-art casino, and then you add some of the retail and the hotel around it, and now you're paying entertainment tax on this. This could be a huge boon to, I believe Arlington Heights is in Cook County, and so even though Chicago doesn't benefit, Cook County would benefit, the state would certainly benefit, and the people from Arlington Heights would benefit, and sports fans could benefit. Now, there's going to be a lot who would be unhappy if the Bears move from downtown to Arlington Heights. Given a choice to where you want to go spend some time, you're going to choose downtown, by the lake as opposed to Arlington Heights. But, once you get over that part of it, it could be a huge win for a lot of folks.
Yeah, you think about those concerts that they have at Soldier Field, the types of shows that they're having there, and they I don't know what the capacity is for a concert. It's certainly well over what it is for football. But I mean, if you can have those year round inside too, I mean, that's only going to help boost, ticket sales and bring people to your location. And, another interesting, just as you're talking there, Hub, just something that crosses my mind is, a Super Bowl in Chicago, I should say a Super Bowl in Arlington Heights is still going to benefit Chicago, because a lot of these events, these side events at the Super Bowl are going to be taking place in Chicago. And you watch the pregame shows, maybe they're going to be outside in the city, and they're going to be involved in the city. You don't see the B-roll of Arlington Heights per se when you're watching games in the suburbs or whatever. They're showing the city, and I certainly think that's something that's going to happen if there is ever to be a Super Bowl or a big event like that.
Well, Sean, it's a great point. You're absolutely right, and it's even more than that, because as we've talked, I had covered 43 straight Super Bowls until 55 became uncoverable in Tampa last January because of the virus. But I hope to be back in Los Angeles this January, and you're only at the stadium, in the stadium complex on Sunday. You spend the whole week in whatever the best parts of whatever town you're in are. And I can guarantee you that if the Super Bowl comes to Chicago, I mean, I'm sure they're going to build, if this sports development happens on that 326-acre parcel, there'll be a hotel there. There's a couple other nice hotels in the area, but nowhere near what you would need for a Super Bowl. So, media headquarters, league headquarters, everything would be in downtown Chicago, as well as all the entertainment. And so whether the number is 150 million or 350 million, whatever the financial benefits from the Super Bowl would be, most of that would end up in Chicago. And in addition to that, it's not like the Super Bowl is it. You'd have Final Fours that would have the same impact. Again, I talked about convention business. There's all kinds of things that it would bring to town where the events might take place on that 326-acre parcel in Arlington Heights, but a lot of the ancillary entertainment business would all end up in the city of Chicago. And other than the fact, and this is, whatever happens here is going to take some time. I don't know what people think of Mayor Lightfoot. I don't live in the city. I don't know her. I will say this, and I hope this isn't controversial. I don't think it is. I really like her, because I really think she's smart, and I really think she's tough. Or let me re-say that. I think she's really smart, and I think she's really tough. Whether she's a good mayor or not, I don't know. So please don't flood us with a lot of stuff. I don't want to have that conversation. But where I was going with this is, I think she's only got, is it 2 years left before she needs to get reelected again? My point is, I don't even know if she's going to be the mayor, and will have had to have been reelected to be the mayor by the time this all starts to take shape. So it's not about her and what's going on between her and the Bears, but as far as the whole, political landscape in Illinois and Chicago and what a quagmire everybody says it is. Again, it's not my area of expertise. I think everybody would agree getting this done is good for everybody in the state of Illinois. What it leaves the city of Chicago with is a white elephant on the lakefront, because now what do you do with Soldier Field? But the Bears don't get to just walk away from the lease. There's about 80 million left on it. If they did leave early, they'd have to pay that. I don't know how it would work with the city's share of concessions and parking, but that could all be worked out. So at the end of the day, you couldn't be more correct. This is good for everybody in Illinois, including Chicago, if it happens. Not as good as if there was a 326-acre parcel on the lakefront. That'd be a different deal. And there actually is, but because of the landmark status, there's things they can't do to Soldier Field. But it's the next best thing. And so we're going to hear, as this develops, if it develops, a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth from Lightfoot and other Chicago politicians. But in reality, they're too smart not to know that they can't really compete with this. And so the idea is to figure out how to leverage it as best they can to the advantage of the city than fighting it too hard. Again, if Neil Bloom and Churchill Downs Incorporated has an interest in being part of this and doing this, which it seems like a natural, but I don't run their business. I don't know their business, so I can't say for sure that it is.
Yeah, this is certainly going to be a topic for a long time to come here, a months long, a years long conversation. I know we got a bunch of questions in the chat here, so I'm gonna move ahead to some questions here, Hub, if you want.
All right, let's get them up on the banner.
Here's a broad one here, which I will pull up.
I've got it there. Yeah, Fry23G, who's obviously a Michael Jordan fan, wants to know, can the Bears win 10+ games? Sean, I'll let you go first because I'm probably going to stir the pot here a little bit with this one.
I certainly think the Bears have the ability to win 10+ games. I would say probably you say 10+. I would say at the shorter end of that. I mean, I certainly think they can win 10 games. It's going to come down to the quarterback play. I mean, I think this defense is going to be good enough to get you that many wins. It comes down to whether the offense can take the steps that we didn't see last year, and whether that's Andy Dalton or Justin Fields. I mean, they've got some intriguing pieces, certainly at wide receiver, and David Montgomery looked really good the second half of last year. If you can replicate that, I don't see why this couldn't be a team that could potentially win 10 games.
You know, it's funny, Sean, because we play the same game every year. The schedule comes out and we look at it and we say, oh, woe is me, or oh, this is great. You know, this is easy, whatever it may be. In this case, the Bears have a bit of a killer schedule. You know, there's no question about that. It looks right now. Now, you stop there, though, and you say, well, what if Ben gets hurt again and Mason Rudolph is the Joe average that we think he is? Suddenly Pittsburgh doesn't look so hard. I'm not sold at Cleveland at all, even though they're a returning 11-win team. I think the Ravens can definitely be had if the Bears' defense is 100%. The Cardinals right now, they've improved themselves, but that's not an unwinnable game for the Bears. And you go on and on. You know, you look at the Rams and Seattle. I mean, the 49ers look to be record-wise, they're the easy one. That could be the toughest of those 4 NFC West games. So you don't know what to make of the schedule going in. But assuming that it works out like it usually does, like a few of these teams go backwards and a couple go forward, if I had to make my pick right now, I would have the Bears somewhere between 9-8 and 11-6. And so there's your 10+ wins, or at least 10. What we have to wait and see, Fry, are all things going to be equal? And by that I mean, can Khalil Mack at 30 and Akeem Hicks at 31 and Robert Quinn at 31 and Tayshaun Gibson at 32 still play at their peaks? Are they still in their prime? I think there's a chance they are. There's a chance they're not. I think Mack absolutely is. The others I'm not so sure of, and particularly Quinn you worry about a little bit. Did they get the right fixes on the offensive line? Is Tevin Jenkins going to be a plug-and-play left tackle? It's hard for me to believe he's going to be worse than Charles Leno, but he's got to be better, you know. And you don't. I mean, right now it looks like Jermaine Ifedi is your starting right tackle. The reason Jermaine Ifedi is a Bear is because he busted out at right tackle in Seattle after being a first-round pick. So these, it looks like they're knee-deep at wide receiver. But do they have anything past number 2? We got to wait now and see with Marquise Goodwin and Demir Byrd and Anthony Miller and Riley Ridley and on and on. You know, Dez Newsome's hurt, but he should be back for the start of the season. You know, what do they have there? But if all those things just work out the way you would expect, in other words, all of it's not going to come true. But as long as there's not a tremendous rash of injuries and most of those guys are still pretty good at what they do, then yeah, I think this is a 10 or 11 win football team. Now, let's not confuse that with, am I predicting, being a contender? We have every reason to believe that there's no way you can win a playoff game with Andy Dalton at quarterback. So, and I'm not trying to be a jerk. Look at the facts. Look at because they're right there for you. He took the Bengals to the playoffs 5 years in a row. And the only reason he's only 0-4 in the playoffs is because year 5 he broke his thumb after week 13 and didn't play the last 3 games in the playoffs, but they lost that first playoff game too. I am not wild about Andy Dalton as my starting quarterback. I don't believe that Justin Fields should start opening day. Will he transition at some point into the position? Will he be starting at the end of the year? Will he be improving, and will they be a playoff team? Then you get into some fun conversation. But for right now, Sean, I see them as anywhere, like I said, again, with all things being equal, from 9-8 to 11-6. But you get if Akeem Hicks is not the old Akeem Hicks, I could immediately go to 8 and 9. If Robert Quinn and Akeem Hicks both, well, then you could have some problems because now you're really going to stress the secondary. If you haven't improved the tackle position, they could struggle to win 6 or 7 games with this schedule. But again, all things being equal, what we know right now prior to going into camp, this is not my season prediction. I think 11 and 6 is a possibility.
Yeah, and you, like you said, you got to have some of that injury luck because it seems like every year there's one team, you look at the 49ers last year with all those injuries, and sometimes you just got to get lucky in that regard and hope it works out. And we got another question here going. We mentioned Riley Ridley a little bit earlier as Hub. You mentioned one of those guys who has you scratching your head sometimes. Here's another receiver, a question from Rick Gonzalez here that I'll pull up.
Can I please explain how Javon Wims is still a Bear? I'll give you the short answer on this one, Rick. No. I don't understand. I think it's a great question, and I don't understand how he was still a Bear by the Monday after he got thrown out of the Saints game. It was so bizarre to me what happened, and the fact that they didn't cut him based on his contribution to the team. And I'll tell you what, I'll go a step further, and you don't want to read too much into this, but last week at the minicamp in the 3 wide receiver sets with Anthony Miller on the sideline, he was one of the starting wide receivers. They had him out there pretty regularly. Now, that's because he's a veteran, I think, is part of it. And he is a significant special teams contributor. He's not a great special teamer, Sean, but he's on all the special teams. He does make a contribution. But I think we've already seen his ceiling as a wide receiver. It's not tremendously impressive. I will be surprised if he makes the team this year, but I agree with Rick here. I don't even understand. I mean, it doesn't hurt now to have him. I mean, he was under contract anyway. It's a former 7th round pick contract, the last year of it. It's not like he's costing you a fortune. It's pretty close to the 4-year veteran minimum, actually. But based on what we saw last year, I am surprised he's still a Bear. I don't know if you would agree or disagree, Sean.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I noticed that as well, out there last week that, he was getting some work in with the first team. And, you're right. There's 90 guys on the roster. Someone's got to fill that spot. There's really no harm in having him there now. I do think he is certainly on life support, so to speak, as far as like being a guy who could be cut here as we move towards the season. But, that's going to depend on some outside factors and health and a lot of things, that are beyond his control too. Another question here.
Well, Sean, real quick before we go, I just want to add one other thought here, though. The other thing you got to keep an eye on here is you look at the contracts they gave Marquise Goodwin and Damiere Byrd. I think they're both pretty much sure things at this point. So now you've got 4 receivers. You're going to keep 5 or 6. All these people who don't understand why Anthony Miller is still a Bear, well, I do understand because he's a whole different prospect. He's got a much higher ceiling than Wims. And again, he hasn't been the disaster some people paint him as. But if Anthony Miller can't make this team, then there's no way Javon Wims can make this team. So
that's a really good point.
We got to keep an eye on the 2 of them because now if those are the first 4, and then if Daz Newsome gets healthy enough to compete, he could end up on injury reserve this year because it looks like this broken collarbone is going to take him right to training camp. Then it becomes a different question. Then you wonder, does Riley Ridley have a chance? But boy, I got to tell you, I look at, forget the rookie, forget Newsome. I look at the veterans, and I still have Wims as number 7 without much of a chance to make the team, but he has always been ahead of Ridley in the couple of years they've been together. So, it must be something I'm missing. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
Oh, no, that's good. This question's a little bit retrospective here looking at the draft, but I think it's worth going back to talking quarterbacks here.
Joey wants to know, why did Justin Fields fall to number 11? Joey, a couple things. You got to be careful not to sometimes read too much into the whys and the wheres, as Matt Nagy likes to say about the draft. You got 32 teams with 32 different opinions. And of the 10 teams that did not take Justin Fields, we knew that basically 5 or 6 of them were not going to take a quarterback. I think what, some people thought, even with Jared Goff there, that maybe the Lions would. I never thought there was any chance that was going to happen. I did think the Panthers might take him at number 8, but they made the Sam Darnold trade, and they seemed to be happy with that. What I think maybe that's a good question, Joey, but what I think is even the more interesting question is, why did he fall behind both Zach Wilson and Trey Lance? Because in my mind, he was clearly the second best quarterback prospect in the draft, all things being equal. And I think the answer there is twofold. People tend to get paralysis through analysis. And they kept going back to those 2 games, Indiana and Northwestern, where he didn't play particularly well, which is really stupid because he had 22 college starts. Those were 2 of them. And if you do your homework, the week after each of those 2, he came out and played some of his better games. And they won those games. Okay. I mean, it's not, he didn't play well, but I mean, you're not perfect every week. So that was part of it. That's where people kept going back and overanalyzing that. But the bigger part of it was the epilepsy story broke. What was it, Sean? 2 weeks, 3 weeks before the draft? Whatever it was. Yeah, it doesn't have to be exact. But as we got closer, suddenly it comes out that he suffers from epilepsy. And now, even in normal circumstances, it would have been too late for some of these teams to go back and check their medicals. But in these circumstances, there was no combine. He hadn't had the thorough medical that you normally get on these guys. And when you're investing a top 10 pick in the draft, particularly at quarterback, you want to do your homework. You're going to think this thing through. And I don't have any better answers for you than that. And this is not 2020 hindsight. We talked about this in our pre-draft shows. Based on his college performance, he was always the second best prospect in the draft. But this is what happens when you go through this process. And if you think that means that he's not very good, don't forget, Alex Smith went number 1 overall. And then 22 teams passed on Aaron Rodgers, and we didn't even have as obvious a reasons why they were passing on Aaron Rodgers. So don't think for a minute that this has any impact on how good he's going to be with the Bears. But Sean, it's the best explanation I got for why he lasted to 11.
Yeah, and dare I mention Trubisky and Mahomes in that same vein as we're talking about these drafts here. And, Another reason why I think it's kind of dumb to harp on those 2, maybe dumb's a harsh word, but, to harp on those 2 poor games from Justin Fields in college is Zach Wilson and Trey Lance weren't playing the same level of competition that Justin Fields was playing week in and week out.
Yeah, listen, I got to tell you guys, Trey Lance is interesting because he is a phenomenal athlete. You talk about a traits guy, and he's got all the tools to be better than Patrick Mahomes. He's that kind of athlete with that kind of arm strength. Now, arm talent and arm strength are 2 different things. Justin Fields and Patrick Mahomes, and yeah, I know what I'm saying. Justin Fields and Patrick Mahomes have similar arm talent. It's not just arm strength. Now, Fields hasn't shown us he can use it at the NFL level. Mahomes can, so he's got a long way to go before he belongs in most other sentences with Mahomes. But, Trey Lance is certainly unique. I look at Zach Wilson and when I can only speak for myself. When I do this, it's never personal. These I'm sure are good kids, and I want to see them all succeed. I promise you I do. I'd like to see every one of them eventually get to a couple Pro Bowls, but they don't. And our job is to analyze this accurately and reasonably. And I'm going to be very surprised if Zach Wilson is a starting quarterback in the NFL in 4 or 5 years. We know what the first contract history is of these kids. This guy is kind of a one-year wonder out of BYU, and I watched the tape of him. I don't see what people are finding so special about him. Yes, he makes some great throws, and he makes them from awkward positions, but you can do that at BYU, and then you try and do the same thing in the NFL, and you end up being Jameis Winston with the new pick 6 record. So we'll see how it goes. But how anybody could have studied Zach Wilson and Justin Fields and be more comfortable with Wilson is a bit of a mystery to me.
Guys, we appreciate all the questions. We're not going to be able to get to all of them, but we'll get through as many of these as we can here in the time we got. Hub, this one, I don't know if we'll be able to satisfy the guy asking this one here, but let me pull it up here.
What is the true story about Kyle Wong's departure? It seems there is a story that no one reports on, and that's from mtran3112. Yeah, I could answer it, but I'm only going to give you part of the answer. Okay, the true story is the obvious part, that after going to the Pro Bowl his first 3 years in the NFL, and he didn't really deserve one of them that year, the right tackle experiment. I mean, he went on rep then, but then he bounced back the next year and was a Pro Bowler again. But after those first 3 years, over the next 4 years, he only played 30 games. And when you've got a $43 million contract, that's what's going to happen. Now, most of the pain in the contract for the Bears, the guaranteed money was gone, but you're still not going to keep a guy, who's going to cost you 11 or 12 million a year, 10 million, I think, in his case, if you suspect he's not going to be on the field. And that was absolutely the biggest part of it. What also happened towards the end, and it was really the last 2 years, partially, there was not 2 bad years, is that Kyle began to get frustrated himself. He began to struggle with all the rehab. He got tired of working his ass off, 24/7 to go out and suffer another serious injury. And it began to impact his attitude a little bit. And he never was a problem with his coaches. He never was a problem with his teammates. He was a fairly popular guy in the locker room. But he did have his own personal frustrations, which caused some temper issues. And he did do some things, which are not ideal when you're trying to herd 53 guys and keep everybody happy and on the same page. I think, Sean, that's about as diplomatic a way as I can say it. But Kyle, it's not like he was a Brandon Marshall. He wasn't a cancer in the locker room. It's not like he was Jay Cutler, a constant disappointment because of attitude or effort or both. Not that Cutler didn't work hard. That's not fair. He did work hard, but his attitude kind of sucked. I think everybody knew that, and that rubbed off on the people around him. None of those things with Kyle. But I think what M-Tran here would like, and what others might like, is just more detail. And I know a little bit more detail of some of the things, but I don't think it would be fair to a guy who was really a great contributor to the Bears organization, and it just didn't work out. I suspect that he wasn't done when he retired. Couldn't be more disappointed now that he comes back and he's hurt again. I don't know if you're following it, but he injured a knee, and they're saying they hope he's ready for training camp. Now, the knee is not one of the ailments that he had here in Chicago, so I just feel horrible for the guy, because if you know Kyle at all, actually, Sean, let me get your opinion. Let me give you a little follow up here, but I just don't want to dominate the conversation too much.
Oh no, I don't have too much to add. I mean, you hope, given this new injury news, that this is something that he can get over and he can get back out on the field, because at least according to the videos on social media and by all accounts, he was doing well after his year off and was ready to get back out there, and hopefully he's able to do that here in a couple of weeks. But no, I don't have much to add about his end with the Bears. You pretty much summed it up there.
Well, but let me go back to the beginning, because I had a somewhat, I don't want to call it famous, but well-known start with Kyle, which was the night of the draft. We were broadcasting via the stream and on internet live on the Score, because there was a Cubs game on. And it was the early days of doing that. And I was I was taking it seriously, but I didn't even know if anybody was listening. And we watched as it built up, and they get to the pick and they draft Kyle. And I just couldn't believe it. And I said, thinking I'm only on the internet here, I don't think anybody's listening, that is a wasted draft pick. Well, my friends at the Score, and I'm not criticizing anybody, that's their job, then decided to make that a promo for live radio for the next 3 days. And Phil Emery, who was the GM at the time, heard it, and he, somewhat well-known, again, not famously, in a fun way, decided to make it a thing between him and me for the rest of his tenure here with the Bears. So I got painted as the guy who thought Kyle Long couldn't play. Well, the true story behind that is not what I said. I did say it was a wasted draft pick, only because it was the 20th pick in the first round, 19 or 20. I always forget which one it was. And I was so frustrated that they had wasted the same pick the year earlier on Shea McClellan. And I had a year's worth of evidence to look at it, so it spilled out. I knew Kyle Long was a very interesting prospect. I also know for a fact that they could have gotten him by trading down in the first round and possibly even as late as the middle of the second round. And so that's what we were talking about. But I also, at the time, was hosting a TV show for the Bears the second night of the draft, and my guest was Kyle Long. And so now, all day long, people have been talking about, I called him a wasted draft pick. So I had to address him and his mom and dad. And I thought, all right, well, the only way you do this is you stare it right in the face. So we met, at the station. It was on Fox at the time before. And I said, guys, I want to get this out of the way right now. And I'm sure you already heard about it from PR because they know. And they kind of smiled and we talked about it and I explained. And, Howie obviously gets it. And Kyle and I developed a pretty good friendship. He's a really great young man. Was at that time, it seemed mature beyond his years. And really good with the media. And so there was never an issue, but Kyle was a kind of larger than life character, and there was a lot that came with him. And so that's kind of a very long-winded explanation for your question, Mtran. There were some behind-the-scene moments, let's just say, between Kyle and the organization, not with any people individual. And it was just in the best interest of both sides that he move on. And let's not forget, he was not released. He retired. And so the team and Kyle got together to end this in what they thought was the most positive way possible. I'm sorry for going so long.
That's a great story, Hub. That shows that you're a true professional. That you can look the guy in the eye after that all that goes down.
Well, you do this as long as I have, and you've pissed off more than a few people. So you find out, the best way to handle anything is you just be honest and you take it straight on. And the point of the story isn't about what I did; it's about what a good person Kyle and his family were, because they understood, and it worked out well for everybody, I think.
I know we don't want to go too much longer. Hub, you got time for one more here?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Let's see. This is I like the way this question's worded. So I'm sorry, guys, we aren't able to get to all of them, but here's one more, Hub.
Why does Coach Nagy preach competition, but when it comes to quarterbacks, there is no competition? That question from Richard Houston. Richard, I don't want to cop out on you, but that's the column I'm writing as soon as we finish the podcast today. So it really is. So go to shawlocal.com and you'll get a detailed explanation. I'll tease it, I guess, here, Sean, by simply saying, Richard, is there competition or not, I guess is the way I'm going to answer you, because I asked Matt this question on our Zoom conference with all of the media last week, and his explanation, he got a little perturbed with me, Sean. I think you might agree. Again, good relationship with Matt. He does well, but he's hearing a lot of this, and this is an angle that I think they struggle to explain. And the way he explained it is that right now they want Andy Dalton to be number one and Justin Fields to be number two, because they're both new to the offense and they need as many reps with starters and better players as possible. Whereas Nick, Foles is also a veteran like Dalton, but at least was here last year, blah, blah, blah. He said, however, he stresses to them every day that they must play their very best and that they are competing on a daily basis to change that depth chart. So while he says there's no competition for the starting job opening day, and believe that there isn't, it is a little hard to understand why last year, Nick Foles would come in and you'd give up a fourth-round pick and guarantee over $20 million and say he has to compete for the job with Mitch Trubisky. And then a year later, you give up nothing for Andy Dalton and you guarantee him less than half, and yet you give him the job. I understand why Justin Fields isn't being allowed to compete right now, because even if he is, I'll tell you, let me not even say even, Sean, he's better physically, athletically than Andy Dalton or Nick Foles. You can see that. But that's the one position where the mental part is maybe even more important, or at least as important as the physical part, and there's no way he can be prepared mentally right now. But you turn it around, and there is nothing in the track records of Andy Dalton and Nick Foles to suggest that Dalton is better prepared than Foles. And so it is, it's a great question from Richard. I'm not sure why well, I think the answer may be, sorry, Richard, I'm getting to it, I'm buried the lead here, is that they claim that the 49ers wanted him as bad as they did, and that the difference maker was when they promised him the starting job. Now, the 49ers couldn't because they didn't know if Jimmy Garoppolo would still be there. So that may be part of the explanation, but I don't think it's a good one, Sean. I don't think there's really any excuse for Foles not being allowed to compete with Andy Dalton.
No, and the fact is, too, in the NFL, no matter what the coaches are saying, no matter what anybody's saying publicly, these guys are always competing, whether it's the off season or in season. Andy Dalton's going to be feeling that pressure once he starts having, if he has a bad game here and there, that conversation is going to come up a little bit more. And whether that happens in training camp or during the regular season, early in the season, late in the season, whatever, these guys are always fighting for a job because you're never rarely are you guaranteed a job in the NFL.
Yeah. So Kyle, let's hit one more topic real quick, and this will be kind of our close, and then we'll be back in a couple of weeks, and I'm sure everybody's still going to be talking about similar things. But relative to what we've been talking about all spring and summer so far before we go on break, Andy Dalton, if he's healthy, is going to be the opening day starter, and you got to go a step further than that. Okay. He can't have one bad game and just take the job away from him. It's not like he's going to be on a terribly short leash. I mean, if he's playing poorly and the team is losing, then you could see Justin Fields sooner rather than later. But if he's playing, average or poorly, but the team is competing or even winning, he's going to keep that job for a while. So, and again, it's all about, Matt Nagy, believe it or not, played a huge role in developing Patrick Mahomes. He was the offensive coordinator there that first year when they sat him on the bench for 16 straight weeks. And so he gets the benefit of it. And there is benefit to Justin Fields in this. If you doubt it, ask Patrick Mahomes, ask Aaron Rodgers, who waited 3 years. I mean, ask almost every, Tom Brady, who, well, of course, he was a 6th-round pick, but nonetheless, ask almost every great quarterback who's played, other than Roethlisberger and Russell Wilson. You're not going to find an example without going back to Dan Marino, of a guy who stepped right in and was ready. And so, there are reasons to keep Fields on the bench. And then, what you don't want to do, Sean, is what the Dolphins did last year, which is have Ryan Fitzpatrick come out, have him playing well, then switch to Tua for reasons that were unclear to everybody. Tua didn't play badly. He just didn't play as well as Fitzmagic. And so they ended up having to go back to Fitzpatrick, and then went through the whole offseason with questions about whether they were going to trade Tua and draft another quarterback. And you do not want to create that scenario with Justin Fields. So the key is not whether or not he is ready week 3, week 6, week 10. The key is don't go to him before you are 100% sure he is ready. And that's going to be a weekly evaluation process they're going to go through.
Yeah, and Matt Nagy's not going to give us a whole lot of information on that, as he hasn't so far. I don't expect that we'll be learning a whole lot more than we already know throughout training camp.
At the end of the day, Bears fans, because I know you're getting impatient, as much as a promise has been made to Andy Dalton, if he's on the roster, his $10 million salary is guaranteed. Actually, it's not guaranteed until he's on the roster, but he's going to be on the roster. You can't sign a veteran quarterback free agent, promise him the starting job, and then cut him before the final cut down and retain any credibility with the rest of the league if you want to ever sign another free agent. So Dalton's going to make the team. That means his $10 million is going to be guaranteed. But if you stop there, Sean, if Justin Fields goes out there and just absolutely lights it up in 3 straight exhibition games and throughout training camp, and the Bears say, what the hell, he's our best option, there's a 1% chance that they could tell Andy Dalton, gee, we're sorry, but you can see what happened here. And he's going to collect his $10 million anyway. And I don't think anybody's going to feel terribly sorry for him. So you never say never, but most likely right now it's Andy Dalton for anywhere from, I'd say, 3 or 4 to 17 weeks. Or it's Justin Fields somewhere. Start watching, around week 4, week 5, week 6, and see how the team is doing, and you'll be able to predict yourself when you're going to see the heir apparent and the hopes of the franchise.
Well, I think that's probably a good place to wrap it up, Hub. I know we said at the top, we're taking a couple of weeks off from the podcast, guys. There's not a whole lot going on here in July, but be sure to check out shawlocal.com. We will still have some analysis and coverage getting you ready for training camp.
Yeah, and guys, we're going to miss you. That's not why we're taking 2 weeks off. It's just that, we've covered everything that's happened over the last 6 months, I think pretty in depth at this point, and there's nothing new going to happen now. The team is on vacation, hiatus, whatever you want to call it. Everybody at the end of this week, the rookies are cut loose. The veterans were cut loose last week. For the next 4 weeks, they are not together at all. They are allowed in Hallis Hall. There will be people working, but short of the stadium situation, there won't be much news. We probably should leave with this. The last we heard from Churchill Downs is they expect it to take 6 to 8 weeks for them to evaluate these multiple offers that they said they have. Remember, it was a week ago this past Tuesday, so it's unlikely we'll hear much more about the stadium situation, but we are likely to hear more in about 6 weeks. So we'll be back well ahead of that. In the meantime, we want to thank our great friends at Heinz Lumber. They have been fantastic sponsors of our podcast. They have 11 locations throughout Chicagoland. Been doing this since 1892, guys. They're going on 130 years. They are your first and best stop for any of your building needs, whether you're building a new house, doing an addition, just have some busy work or contracting you want to get done around the house. Make sure you find the Heinz Lumber location nearest you. We want to thank all of you for joining us, for your questions, for listening. Our buddy Kyle will be back with us in a few weeks. We trust all is well with the Neighbors family. We know it is, and that he enjoyed his day off today. And again, guys, have a great summer, or at least the next couple of weeks. We'll be back to talk at you. And make sure that you are following at Sean_Hammond at Twitter and at Hub_Arkush, because we will promo the actual recording time of these each week so that you can join us live via Twitter or YouTube if you want to be part of the conversation and give us questions. Or if you just like listening to the podcast, make sure you go to your app store, to iTunes, to shawlocal.com, get a subscription so it downloads automatically for you. And after this one, we'll be back with you in a couple of weeks. Enjoy the next few weeks, folks. Hope it's a great summer for everybody. We'll be back talking NFL and Bears 3 weeks from today. Take care.